Hello, welcome back to the David Watson podcast. Today I spoke with Etienne and storyteller, particularly a children's storyteller. But what was fascinating and what I really enjoyed is where the inspiration comes from. Hello, welcome to the David Watson podcast. How are you doing? Are you well?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. I was looking through the brief that was sent to me, and one thing that stood out is there's a line from the brief that I was given. It was this: how you finally got to follow your childhood passion to paint and illustrate a book. So what is it you wanted to do as a child that wasn't able to do?
I painted, and I knew that I would not be a professional painter, but I did want to do something with that skill. And when eventually I realized that stories and illustrating the stories is an ideal avenue for utilizing that skill, it all came together. I could actually use my artistic skills to carry a narrative.
How did you know as a child that you couldn't do it for a living?
I was I was one of those annoying kids who was always excelling at school. So I was aiming for one of the good professions.
Right.
And although I loved the art, I realized that it's not going to be the mainstay
Yeah,
of my life, my professional life. It would be a hobby, and it always has been.
that's very insightful for a child.
Yeah. As I say, I was annoying.
So how old were you when you do you remember when you started picking up? I'm assuming we're talking about painting and stuff.
Yes, it was. I was about 12. I grew up on a sugar estate on the north coast of KwaZulu-Natal. It's the main industry in that area, and my father was involved in a company, Lonro, the London Detergent Company. Tony Rowland was the big boss at that time, and that estate that we lived on, I was there until the age of 12. And then we moved to Durban, and my father became a businessman. And I was in an apartment, and they kept business hours. So I was sort of locked in during school holidays with not much to do. And a neighbor taught me to paint, and suddenly I could use my time productively.
So did
I
you have
found that I've got a knack for it.
yeah? Do you have like a favorite style, a favorite way to paint?
I regard myself as an impressionist. I don't fidget too much with detail. My purpose is to capture a moment, a fleeting moment, and once I've captured it, I leave it. So it is an impression that you're creating. It's a style. I think that's more or less. Sometimes I would go into a bit more detail. Depends on the artwork in question. But my broad approach was to follow the light, and if you've captured the moment, that's it. Yeah,
It's nice. I like that. I've never really, I've never really understood impressionist work, and that's a really nice way of that line. Just once you've captured the moment, just leave it.
that's right. Yes.
That's a life lesson in itself, really.
Well, it's true. It's true. I think my hobby, because I do it almost daily, it's probably a form of journaling. It's like a way of accounting for moments of beauty and splendor that my eye caught during the day. And if the image lingers, I'll try and do something with it, create an artwork or just a memory. I don't just do scenes. I do portraits. I draw figures, landscapes. So anything, I draw anything. I like the play of light on objects, and that's why I think it would be safe to call me an impressionist.
Yeah.
Because the light the effect of light on objects means that if you just accentuate those parts that are lit, your brain will do the rest to complete the figure. The impression is there.
Okay. So can this be just like you'll just see something while you're out and about during the day, and if it just holds a place in your mind, you'll put it down on at the end?
I usually have my phone with me, and I'd probably snap it,
Yeah.
and see what I can do with what I've captured. I wouldn't draw just from memory. I've tried that. It becomes a bit stilted.
Yeah.
You need something more to capture the life in a moment. And your memory is inclined to remove layers of information that were available to you. A photograph will bring it back, and that sort of makes it more alive.
Yeah, I suppose it's a bit like this could be like too much of a segue, but it's almost like when you listen to or hear a piece of music you haven't heard since you were a child, the memory comes back. That memories you forgot you even had.
That's true. Yes, haven't you just seen these clips of Alzheimer's patients who are
Yeah.
no longer verbal, and then a piece of music comes along and they break out in song? And music has a way of, it has its own special place in the mind.
Does it's so evocative, they're just certain pieces of music that come from your childhood. They just stand out in a way that no other does.
That's right. Mm.
So going from so at what point did you realise you wanted to write? Did you always know you wanted to write children's books?
No, not at all. I was a very serious young lawyer, an advocate at the bar, and had two children. And obviously, like any parent, you would tell them stories. And some of my experiences with the kids was that they weren't interested in what was in the books. I had to tell them a story off the cuff, and that put my mind on these flights of fancy, which I later started using in writing storybooks. Both my children had difficulties with their legs, and at the age 5, they had operations which placed them in plaster casts for 2 months, and they had to relearn to walk. Now, can you imagine keeping a child occupied in those circumstances? So I would dictate or record stories for them and leave the tapes for them while I'm away. And one of those sets, it was for my daughter specifically. I recently got to illustrate it for her because she herself has a little girl now. So those stories came back on tape, and I could illustrate them and give them back to my granddaughter.
I can't imagine. How proud are you of being able to do that?
How old am I?
No, how proud are you to have been able to that you have these stories that your daughter obviously loved, and then you're able to play them for your granddaughter and illustrate them. That must be like one of those life achievements that you never thought about, but actually has the most meaning.
It does have meaning, particularly for her mother, because she remembers it well, and she remembers it fondly. But my little granddaughter that I was speaking of, she plays a central role in my in the story writing that I've started. I started writing these stories in 2017. It was a time I was recently bereaved, and had to have something to look forward to. And the idea of grandchildren kept me going, and I was writing stories to them, hoping that if I never got to meet them, they would know my voice through stories.
Yeah.
And so I got into writing stories for this particular little girl. I knew what her name would be, although she wasn't born until 2 years ago. And so she has little books with stories which were dedicated to her. And the thought of her sort of kept me going at that time. Then came COVID, and we were all locked down. And I realized that I can't imagine a more difficult place to be than to be a parent locked up in a little apartment with toddlers and children, and trying to keep them occupied. So I wrote stories and illustrated them and then disseminated them on social media to people with children, just to give them a few minutes of a break. And that was a bizarre time. But I thought they deserve a few minutes of peace. And hopefully these stories could play a role in giving them a brief respite. And also the children would enjoy the stories, and they would stimulate the parents to start talking to the kids about topics that are introduced by them.
Did you get much feedback?
I did get feedback, people saying that they love the stories. There are some of them that they wanted, that had to be reread over and over. And I got feedback from people saying that they haven't seen stories like these. It's not run-of-the-mill stuff. It's quite layered. And the title that I've given is Bedtime Stories for Clever Kids, because it's not a simple narrative. Although the words might be simple, they carry layers of meaning, and the same topic would often take a shift in a different direction and assume a new meaning. And those shifts, etc., I know children can make those shifts, but they're not in normal children's books. Well, what I regard as normal.
It's a great achievement when you get feedback from parents saying that the children wanted to hear the stories again and again and again.
Yes, it's affirming. It makes you want to carry on. At least it's as though you have found a little niche where your skills have meaning outside of yourself. You know, you're enriching other people's lives, and that in itself is a reward on its own.
It is a good reward, and especially when it's probably one of the most incredible services we can do as a person, because when you're reaching people that you may never meet, and it's having a positive impact, that level of influence can never be underestimated.
That's correct. You wouldn't know what the impact is, but then just sometimes you get feedback telling you that what you thought was just a little story had a meaningful impact on somebody's life, and they will recount it to you, and it's a reward, as I say, which an unexpected advantage of telling little stories and disseminating them.
Where do you think the ideas come from?
It's so diverse. Sometimes it's a word that sparks it. Sometimes it's an image. Sometimes it's an interplay between two thoughts, the tension between two thoughts. It's so diverse. I wish I could pin it down and bottle it, but it's like any spark of inspiration. It just comes. And the irony is that I only have the spark when I start. I have no idea where the story is going to go. And
that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't shape them in advance. So the thought, I would just run with it. And I write the stories as the thoughts come up, and it progresses and it develops, etc. So it's very much a path that my mind follows in pursuit of whatever inspired me, and it takes me to amazing places. So I find it very entertaining. I often throw in jokes, also to entertain myself. Hopefully they'll entertain the parents as well.
So if somebody's listening, because that's a really interesting way to write. you effectively, I'm guessing, you just sit yourself down and just start putting it down on paper.
It's literally as simple as that. That when I sit down, I start writing the first thought that comes into my mind. I start writing it, and I keep going. It's like a form of stream of consciousness, but you are just sort of putting it out on paper, and in the process, you I think you are led in the moving. As you are busy, your mind takes you to a different place and to a different place. And in the end, it's an exhilarating experience to get a story, a 2-3 pager down on paper. And then you start shaping it and illustrating.
What's fascinating about that is a lot of people, when they're trying to write a book, even when they're writing successfully, are terrified by the prospect that they're sitting down and they're just like, I've got nothing here. What do I do? And
Yes.
you said something earlier about painting every day is like journaling. So I wonder if the painting gets any of that procrastination, any of that, whatever it is for anybody, that's almost the cathartic measure that takes the objection out of the way, so that when you're sitting down to write, it just flows.
I think it is, all these things are, of course, retained in your subconscious when you sit down. I don't have this blank page fear of many authors. I do many things. I feel that I need to account for my time. So the painting and the stories and the writing, etc., it's all a way of accounting for me being here. And I don't take myself too seriously in the process, but it does mean that thoughts they proliferate, and sometimes you've got to keep up. And writing is a wonderful way of giving shape to a thought that you've been carrying around, and sometimes you don't realize you've been carrying it with you, or that it would take you on a specific journey. It's an amazing experience.
You seem to have, without realizing, or maybe you do realize, and if I've got it wrong, I apologize, but you seem to have figured out the secret of getting out of your own way and just letting the subconscious do it for you.
I would, I think so. Yes, I know what sparks my eye. I would paint. Now, this is often a word or a thought which also sparks the author in me. So I would just grab it and see where it takes me.
So how do we? So the thing that I'm pondering on that fascinates me is I'm a great believer when I'm coaching people and stuff like that, that if you want something, you have to assume that it's happened and then deconstruct it so you can break it down into the little steps that enabled that imaginary person to get there. And I'm trying to deconstruct how one day you got out of your way and it all just happened. Now, it could have been the necessity of entertaining your two children when they were young because they were in plaster casts. And there was just this thing that you tapped into that, well, it's more important. I need to serve them. They have needs right now. And I'm limited in the capacity of, like you say, how do you entertain children when for 2 months when they're in plaster casts and can't walk? It's something about that is it's not about you. It's about they need something, and I'm the father, and I've got to give it to them. So is that what happened? Does that make sense? It's
Yes, as I say, particularly when my children were growing up, obviously the stories that I would tell would be there to entertain them, but I would often use them as opportunities for teaching. But as far as my granddaughter was concerned, and the start of the book, the stories, the 11 stories in this little book, they were shaped. It was a bit more sophisticated at the time when I started writing those, and because words are the currency I use professionally, I would use them when I write stories to try and convey specifically to children messages that I think that would help them. There's so many pitfalls for children nowadays, bullying and drugs and violence. Many of these things are part of children's daily living, and I would dearly like to help children to be able to cope with adversity by handing skills to them with a light touch, so that they could actually learn something without the trauma. Hopefully the seed is there and the resources available when it's needed. So
was there a deliberate plan to use animals in the stories?
I live in a country with such a diversity of wildlife.
It's almost a stupid question then.
It's just you probably heard the heady flying overhead
Mm-hmm.
a moment ago. Animals are often more user-friendly in a story context. Children will identify with animals, and they would quite often, you would attribute characteristics to a specific animal that it clearly doesn't have, but it's part of the story. It's part of the narrative that you are busy developing. So I find animals to be useful bearers of narrative. Different types of animals. Sometimes it's children observing animals. There's one story about cuckoos. Then there are other stories where the main actor is an animal. There's a book about an ostrich or a peacock. Sometimes it's your vantage point isn't fixed, and that's what makes it fun to write children's stories. The narrator can be anything. In my second story, the narrator is a chessboard who sighs because he feels trapped in two dimensions. He knows there's a game being played on top of him, but his world just goes forward, backward, and sideways, and he realizes there's more. So that story introduces a concept of dimensions where the bearer of the story, the narrator, is an inanimate object. So you can give life to anything. And animals are useful. I use children. I use whatever is available.
Earlier, you mentioned you discussed that it was important to be accountable for your time.
Yes.
Where does that come from? What does that mean?
I think it's part of the way I was raised. The idea of stewardship is very much part of my upbringing, accounting for what you've received. And I think it's so ingrained that it's part of what I do. I don't feel it's not an external force; it's an internal drive, and I'm happy to. It makes me more productive than I would otherwise be, and that's not a bad thing. So I use it, and I do realize that when I compare myself to many other people, that in the process I am creating a lot more than they would. But it's just what I do. So
So how do you do? Yeah, how do you do it then? Because that's probably one of the most. You seem to have said something there that's possibly one of be, regardless of what somebody's intending to achieve, it could be one of the most useful skills that you can develop as a person.
Yes, I think time is finite and we've only got one life. And it's important that that life matters. And it would matter, into my mind, if it were a source for good for other people. I'm not looking for the advantage for myself. So there's an altruistic part to it. And I think the stories, as I say, they are projections of myself in the direction of an audience that I hope would be receptive to many of the themes that I'm introducing. And the stories, they will carry a narrative, and they'll be fun, of course, but they are also profound themes that come out of the stories, and it's a good opportunity for parents to pick up on it. Yeah, I think that's about what I can say.
What is the process of making yourself accountable?
I think it's a choice. I think it's a deliberate mindset that you choose. And I have a Christian upbringing, so it's sort of ingrained in who I am. And in the process, it's a joyful way of accounting for time. I think it's massive fun. It's not as though it's a burden or anything, but it is part of a process of trying to live a life that benefits others.
I do like that. It's for me. Um, I was raised what I describe as a Southern Irish Catholic. It's my mum, born and bred Southern Ireland. I was raised as a Catholic. I went to Catholic schools and stuff like that. And I've spoken about this before on the podcast that there is a greater meaning to you reap what you sow, and
Yes.
it's not about you per se. It's about what happens in your community when everybody is focused on how they harvest their lives. That's why the imagery was always based around harvesting and farming and stuff like that, because it's about how, on an individual level, the more you do, how it can extend into the community in different ways. And so like you, I've always appreciated that these sayings, which become cliches, is only because we don't focus on the depth of meaning to them, and that there is a service to the community, that when you're focused in that way, that reap what you sow really benefits, because, as we were saying at the beginning, stories that originated from telling your daughter became something that you're able to give your granddaughter, which you then, via social media, were able to give to other families. And you were fortunate in that there was feedback from people about who expressed a gratitude because of the entertainment that it gave to a child. Who, and there's a point, maybe I'm overdeveloping the thought process here, but I always like to believe that there will be a child. I remember the stories from when I was a child. So there's, through your act of giving a story, there could be a child that will grow up remembering the gift that you gave. You do, and then it goes down generations.
What a lovely thought.
Yeah,
Yes. Yes, it's something that I would obviously cherish. A thought that whatever words I used would have meaning in a child's life. If you talk about bedtime stories, bedtime is a very important time.
mm.
It's a time when children are receptive. They're tired, they're receptive, And it's an important moment for parents to build something into their children. Now, your words as a parent, they can build or they can break. And if you've used your words to judge a child and to make a child feel worthless, saying it once could last a lifetime in that child's mind. Because words that come from a parent are received as high authority. And if there's a judgment involved and it comes from a parent, then it must be a valid judgment. Mm. And if it denigrates you, you've been burdened and you've been hurt. And I think that's a terrible thought, that the parent would harm a child through their words. So it's important, I think, that you must place a guard before your mouth. You can never unsay something, even if you had reason to be angry. You can never unsay something to your child. And words, these stories are opportunities to drop little gems into their lives, and hopefully they will come to fruition in time.
One of the things I really love about the example you gave with bedtime stories is when parents, and I know, and it's difficult for parents. Nobody's going to say it's not. But when you give that time to storytelling at bedtime, every child, when they're getting ready for bed, at the end of every day, know I have mum or dad's attention right now. And it's undivided attention with purpose. And it's only about them. And that's been true since the beginning of time. That,
correct.
And it's interesting. I don't have children. I have a niece and nephew. And when my niece was really young, as you can imagine, as being an uncle, you kind of, the great thing about being an uncle is you don't have to be a responsible parent. So you can always just be fun at my sister's expense. And you can get to do all these great things with your niece. My nephew was autistic, so the way that he interacted required a very different sort of set of skills than dealing with my niece. And I've no idea how I figured this out, but one day my niece, because I work, I coach and stuff like that, and at that time I used to do very varied shift patterns. So what I got into the habit with my niece was showing her my diary so she could see for the week or the next week, whatever, what I was doing. And so she'd say, "Oh, right, Uncle David's working that day. But you're not working that day and you're free in the morning." And I'd let her just write her name and the time. So, and she could choose whatever we were doing, and sometimes you'd just hang out. The thing I noticed is it got to the point where her confidence grew so much she could just come into the office, open the diary. She would know what she was wanting, and she would just, she would always, obviously ask my permission. But it became this thing, and she understood from like the age of sort of 4 or 5 that if Uncle David worked, so Uncle David was busy. But if I go into the diary and write my sort of, for want of a better term, my appointment in the diary, she had undivided attention. She never demanded anything above that. And when people are like, the kids want you, and I realized very early on that kids don't care if you say, "Look, I'll be with you in 10 minutes." What they care about is if you don't turn up in 10 minutes.
That's correct.
And my niece knew that if she put her name in the diary for a morning and afternoon, or even a day out, she could have what she put in the diary. And she never demanded anything outside of that. And it was this weird, it's like, oh, this is a trust thing, because she knows that what I will do, what I've said I will do. But she understood immediately that there were demands to being an adult. and it just worked. And it's whenever I tell people just do that, and I'm not
Mm.
saying, like as parents, what I mean is sometimes as parents, what you need to do is set a routine that they will understand. And if that's a schedule on the wall calendar on the fridge, just do it. Don't be afraid. Do it, because
Mm.
children will see. Oh, on Friday the 17th, we're all going to the cinema,
Mm.
and that sits in their mind because they're much more capable than we give them credit for.
Yes.
But they need
That,
certainty.
mm. The fact that children are capable of more than we give them credit for is one of the underlying thoughts
Mm,
of my stories. And what you've just illustrated with your niece is how comforting it is to a child to know that an adult parent, an uncle, is available
yeah,
just for you. And I think it's a form of validation to know you are worth the time. You know that you are on the receiving end of an adult's benevolence. And it's a special position to be in where you can trust an adult in that way. I think with children at bedtime, I think it's almost a given. It's an entry on every day of the week's program that there will be bedtime. And if you have your parents' undivided attention, it's a time for comfort. It's a time of validation. It's a special time.
it is. I like I said, I've no great epiphany as of why I understood that I can offer anybody. I just understood the only currency children want is your time.
Mm.
And if you can give them, again, for want of a better term, some form of program where they can say, "Oh, right, that's when I get your undivided attention,"
Mm.
they never demand more.
True. I think if you spend time with a child or individual time, the message they get is one of love,
Mm.
of being worthy of being loved. And that's a great message to convey to a child.
It's the important one as well. That I think you just said something there that is, needs repeating. It's being worthy of love. It's making a
Mm.
child feel not just that they're loved, but that they're worthy of love.
That's right. Mm.
It, yeah, and from and when children feel that they're worthy of love, that's the foundations that they need, not to sort of necessarily to follow their dreams, to be comfortable with what they want out of life and what they feel inspired by.
I think it builds confidence. A child who feels loved is a child who feels grounded and who feels safe. And that's a wonderful place in which you can build character, you can build confidence, and step out eventually on your own and explore the world. It could be so much different if a child is timid and fearful, and does not feel loved. That's yeah. I think it's one of the great sadnesses of our modern times, just how many children do not get attention that they deserve and do not get the message daily that they are worthy and that they are loved. But as a parent, that's a message that's, if it's the only message you convey, it's you're building something solid into your child.
It is, and the saddest thing is being overcomplicated when all your child wants is they just want your time.
Mm.
And generally speaking, not exclusive, obviously, but most children, they, they don't really care if you're reading a book or you're pushing them on a swing. They just want
Mm.
to spend time with mum or dad.
Yes,
That's
your presence is comforting. That's
yeah,
true. And your undivided attention, I think, makes a child feel special.
it does. And I think of when I think of a kid as a child, and so many children's programs, or like the one that popped into mind. I can't remember the story, but it was always things like some kid, his dad was a lorry driver, and he'd just go out on the lorry with him for days on end because it was school holidays.
Mm.
As a child, all you're doing is sitting next to your dad while you're staring out of the windscreen while he's stuck in traffic driving down a motorway. You know,
Mm.
but these stories, whenever you talk to children, like I've had friends who like dads were mechanics and whatever, but they got to spend time with their dad when they're on holidays. And when you listen to them, like how much they loved it, most of them was just free child labour because they were hanging out with mum or dad. It was great, you know. But
They're also learning skills in the
yeah,
process. Of
yeah,
dad teaches you how to fix a car. It's a good thing.
it is. It is. Um, are you continuing to write books?
Yes, yes. Um, I have many stories which are not in this book, which are already in a format that I could do a few other books of these stories, and the stories keep coming. I mean, I'll probably do one or two a month at this stage. Sometimes there's something very specific that sparks it. The stories are sometimes written for a very specific child, but the message conveyed is a more general one. For example, in one of the more recent stories, a child has been born with a port wine stain very visible in her face. And this is causing anguish for the parents. And the idea was to write a story that would give comfort to the child. And so that was the thought. What can I do that can make this child feel that it's okay? It's just a mark. It doesn't define who she is. And it's only a problem if people make a fuss of it. It's so if how to cope with a parent who cringes, part of the theme, and how to deal with people, other children who make fun of you if you have a visible birthmark or something like that. So that story had a very specific purpose. Another one was for yeah.
Please carry on.
Yeah. Another one was for a child who's a little girl who's just been born. She is my honorary granddaughter. She's the daughter of a colleague who I've been mentoring. And I am an honorary grandfather, so I'm very proud of it. And I wrote her a story to try and convey to her that she has great value, and that the value that is seen in her by those who love her is always there. And the little story conveys this message that value doesn't go away if you are among people who don't see your value. You must look inside, it's always there, and keep walking until people see what we see, and that is that you are special. So a little story like that, a specific child, to speak to her, but the message is a general one. And other children would get the same message if they read the story.
So themes like that, the moral behind them is just as transferable to adults.
Yes, very much so. I think many of the themes that I introduce here are of equal application in the adult world. I think that just that the children, parents who talk to their children get a first opportunity of dealing with it, so that their children are ready for what life might throw in their direction. But they, as adults, would have to face the same things: how to deal with adversity, how to deal with rejection, how to deal with failure.
Just have a couple of questions before we finish up. And I have this phrase that I say to people, like when people are being hard on themselves. If you're going to be hard on yourself, beat yourself up with a feather. Um, and that generally comes from when people kind of put themselves up against some sort of measuring stick. They really they never use the same measuring stick they would use for somebody they love. They tend to beat themselves like they're responsible for global genocide or something, when really they just missed an appointment. It's completely disproportionate.
Yeah.
So for people who are, this is coming from where you just mentioned being asked to be an honorary grandfather. So somebody is looking at you as an individual with all of those qualities, and you're doing something exceptionally well, that somebody is reaching out and saying, I want you to be a part of my child's life. And what is it, as would you suggest, as a parent, grandparent, mentor, whatever, that you do well?
That I do well.
Yeah.
I think what I do try and impart to children and to people that I deal with is their value, that their lives matter, and that I care how they are doing. And I'm interested in them as people, and that's why when I write to children. I don't talk down to them. I don't necessarily use simple language, because I think children understand more than we think they do, and it's also an opportunity for parents to explain difficult words. But the idea that you are worth it and that you matter is a message that I think, a validating message, which is something that I think I would continue to convey to people who come across my path.
I like that. And lastly, and this is extremely random, not related to anything we've discussed, I want you to use your imagination, and it doesn't have to make any sense. If there was such a thing as a time machine that you had access to, where would you go in history, and why would you go there? What car would be the mode of transport, and what music would be playing on the radio?
I think the artist in me would like to go back to the 1890s, Europe and France specifically, to experience the countryside and the beauty that the impressionists that I admire, that they saw. France, I often go there, and it has a light quality to it, which I understand that it sort of imbues the entire impressionist movement. What type of music would I want to play? I love classical music, love Mozart, and I love a modern young artist who is very skilled. His name is Jacob Collier, and his music is, I think, changing the world. So I think there is, it's a diverse thought, but I love Mozart.
What car would you use as transport, as a time machine?
What car? A 2CV.
Nice. Citroen 2CV.
French little car with two little lights.
Perfection of engineering.
Yes.
It doesn't get any simpler, and it can go anywhere.
Yeah. No, I think, as I say, I'm sort of heading back, but it combines a number of my interests.
No,
specific time period.
The 2CV, for people that don't know what a 2CV is, was made by Citroen, I think originally in the 50s, but don't quote me on that. But its ability to look good outside a cafe in Paris and go down a track, it's so dimensional in what it was able to achieve as a vehicle with such a small engine. It's one of the greatest designs of engineering that was fit for purpose that's ever been made.
Well, then I think I made a good choice.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your time. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you, David. Keep well. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And there you go. Another episode. And I love the idea that, and maybe it's because I don't have children, so I romanticize it a bit too much. the idea that a man one day told his children stories, and those stories led to telling stories to their grandchildren, and that led to people telling his stories to their children. Maybe one day those children will tell their children, maybe even their grandchildren. And I think along those lines, because I think of Roald Dahl and the stories I grew up listening to that I have told to my niece and nephew. And one of the joys in life is when you can read stories to children. It's a simple joy. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. As always, wherever you're from, whatever you believe, please take care. Be blessed. Thank you.